Mason bees, as well as a lot of the native solitary bees, are important because they allow for future generations of the native plants upon which the entire ecosystem is dependent. And if we don't have pollinator species, we're not going to have the seeds for those plants to be there in the future. So providing homes for them is just a little step that we can do. Providing food and adequate nutrient resources for them is the other part. So you want to make sure that you have both of those components. If you're building a house, you need to make sure that it's in an area where you've also planted some natives in order to try to encourage the species that you're supporting. So that being said, mason bees are solitary bees. There are numerous varieties where you live. In Kansas, there are several dozen varieties of mason bees and solitary bees. They live in what used to be hollowed out stems from grass, or the remnants of butterfly milkweed or other milkweeds like you were talking about today that have those hollow centers. They come out in early March, and then they usually gather fresh fruits, or not fresh fruits, fresh nutrients from flowers in the early springtime, and then they from fruiting trees and all of those other variety of fresh flowers. And then they mate, and they put their, they collect materials, and they use their saliva, and they create these little houses within hollowed tubes for their offspring. And that happens in May. Then those stay dormant for about 10 months, and then in March they come out again. So it's pretty obvious why mason bee habitat is missing. If they used to use hollowed out tubes of fallen grass, we now hay that grass. We take that grass and we feed it to livestock. The remnants of that grass is no longer left in open prairies. Even where there are native species for them to stay, the supply is actively removed in the middle of summer. The other place, a lot of bees also are ground dwelling bees. I actually found there were some ground dwelling bees this March in my yard that were slowly coming out. It was really cool. But we till the majority of our soil as well, or if we have it in lawn and we have it in our gardens, it's decimated through herbicides, insecticides, and not having a diverse ecosystem for them to survive on once they get out. So finding materials to make a mason bee house in order to confront some of those problems can be hard. There's a lot of different mason bee houses are made and sold in stores now, because they're really cute. The problem is that a lot of the materials are not replaceable, like not easily replaceable, and you have to replace them every year or replace them when they're spent. You can use, some of them you can use for multiple years in a row. If you're able to get cardboard tubes, you want to line those with paper, and then you're gonna wanna remove the paper and reuse it in the next year. I read a bunch of different stuff on bamboo and using bamboo. A lot of the commercial mason bee hives that you have are made of bamboo. It is problematic in that bamboo molds really quickly. Here's some bamboo that I harvested from a neighbor. You can see that there's mold on it. I don't know if we can focus on it or not, but you can see that there's like all of these little tiny mold spores. I'm not going to use this particular piece of bamboo because of that. However, I am using some of the not moldy bamboo that I was able to get, and I'm going to, I have here a concoction of, it's mostly apple cider vinegar and a little bit of water to thin it out, and I'm going to try to soak the bamboo for a little while, and then I'm going to dry it completely before I use it in the house. One of the other things you can do, if you have steel wool or some sort of like small, like abrasive substance, you might scrub it a little bit so that it actually gets in the pores in order to make sure that vinegar is actually getting where it needs to get, not just on the surface. So when you create a mason bee home, one of the really important things, regardless of the materials that you use, is that it is in a safe and dry place for those 10 months. Because one of the biggest things that happens, mason bee homes have become really popular, And one of the things that happens is they are exposed to mites and they're exposed to mold. And those two things can kill the mason bees that you're trying to provide a habitat for. We don't think about mini bees at all because we generally think about honeybees as being the bees. Honeybees are European bees. Some honey, or there's also like killer bees, African killer bees, which are a more aggressive variety of honeybees, both of which are very invasive in this area and have limited the amount that native bees are able to survive because they're not able to find the resources that they need. But there are literally hundreds of kinds of bees. In your yard, you probably, if you put these in your yard, you're probably going to have 4 or 5 different bee species that come and live in them. And so having the different sizes is totally fine and great because you don't know what's in your yard, and you may be being a host to a variety of different species that you may or may not realize are even there. So I think that that's a really important thing to do. They are almost all solitary species, and so I do want to emphasize that making sure that you don't have too big of a nest is probably a good plan in order to make sure that those solitary bees are able to, like, they're introverts, so they just need some space, okay? Commercial bee, mason bee houses often have too many sizes of holes, so three different sizes of holes is probably plenty. Most mason bees are solitary bees, so you don't want to attract a huge number. One of the things I learned about when I was researching the design of these is that a lot of times the mason bee houses are just too big and have too many species, and that can be a deterrent for them actually being productive. So so I would only have a few sizes of holes, and I wouldn't make your mason bee house too big. Another thing with mason bee houses is a lot of times you can get the ones that go in trees. And while they're beautiful, that's not necessarily the best environment for the bee in those hanging, swinging, unsheltered places. So thinking about this and thinking about reuse and sustainability, thinking about how we can use the resources around us, I think it's important when we're designing things to just understand the principle, not try to mimic what it is that we've seen other people do. Like when I was building this, someone was like, oh, I saw that on Pinterest. But understanding the design principle and then using whatever resources you have that are around so that we're diverting from waste streams, I think is really, really positive. So like going out and finding your own milkweed reeds, or going on a walk specifically intending to try to find things that are hollowed tubes that you could use. As long as it's a hollow tube that goes more than 6 inches long, I think you can use that resource. And so I think that, yeah, just understanding the principle is more important than understanding the design itself. And that allows you to have the freedom to do something innovative with the resources that you have available instead of having to be dependent on industrial systems to provide those resources for you.